Less than 2 months after taking office, Australia's Prime Minister has upset a lot of people around the world. Scott Morrison's done that by saying he's considering following the Americans by relocating the Australian embassy to Jerusalem.
The orthodoxy that has driven this debate, which says issues like considering the question of the capital are taboo, I think we have to challenge that.
The United Kingdom is getting set to leave the EU in just a matter of days, and the first country to sign a post-Brexit continuity trade agreement with the UK is Israel. With the goods totaling $4.3 billion, the UK is now Israel's third largest export market behind the US and China.
Israel has summoned the Swedish ambassador after the country's foreign minister called for a probe into claims by human rights groups. They say Israeli forces have carried out extrajudicial killings of Palestinians. The claims come amid a surge of street attacks by Palestinians. The Swedish foreign minister said that the Israeli response was reportedly disproportionate to the degree that extrajudicial killings could be strongly suspected. She says human rights groups and international law experts have expressed similar concerns. It is vital that there are thorough, credible investigations into these deaths in order to clarify and bring about possible accountability. Israel has rejected the minister's statement as delusional. The surge in violence has been fueled in part by increased Jewish presence in areas also revered by Palestinians and frustration over the collapse of peace talks.
Despite there being a number of issues on the agenda for Sunday's meeting, 5 days of unrest and conflict in Jerusalem, Israel and the Palestinian territories meant that US President Donald Trump's statement last week dominated proceedings. Speaking at a joint press conference, the French president reinforced his disapproval of President Trump's decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
I indeed explained to Prime Minister Netanyahu my disapproval of the declaration of the President of the United States that France sees as contrary to international law and dangerous for peace. Dangerous for peace because it doesn't seem to serve in the short term the cause of security of Israel and the Israelis themselves.
In his first foreign trip since President Trump's statement, the Israeli president's response to the issue was direct and uncompromising.
Paris is the capital of France. Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. It's been the capital of Israel for 3,000 years. It's been the capital of the Jewish state for 70 years.
Hello and welcome.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us here today. For our viewers who might not have a full outlook on how the economic relations between Poland and Israel look like, could you give us a brief idea of what it is these days?
Definitely. So, as we witnessed, when we look at the economic data between the two countries, we see that the exports from Poland to Israel have almost tripled itself over the last 4 years, while as the imports from Israel to Poland, as the Israeli export to Poland, have almost stayed the same. So in general,
And even the cancellation of a visit to the Kerem Shalom checkpoint didn't ruin his mood.
When you prepare these visits, always all kinds of possible items come up. One of the possible items was to visit the scanners, which will be based, the children are, hi! And one of them was the scanner being put in place at the Gaza border. And we paid for it, and we have made arrangements with Israeli and Palestinians to make it work. So we dropped the idea. This was not a big deal, not at all.
To stand up for pluralism and democracy, Canada must renew our support for Israel and its inherent right to defend itself. The reality of the Middle East is this: if Israel's enemies were to lay down their arms tomorrow, there would be peace. If Israel were to lay down its arms, there would be no more Israel. And this is why it is disappointing to me that the current government has abandoned Canada's principled support for Israel in abstaining in key votes in the United Nations. When Israel's borders came under attack from Hamas terrorists, as they have in recent days, Canada must support Israel's right to defend itself and recognize Hamas's direct responsibility in inciting violence and the loss of life. Canada must be ready and reliable when Israel needs to count on their democratic friend and ally.
Republicans and Democrats disagree about practically everything. But there's one thing that both sides seem to agree on.
Israel.
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 Every 4 years, presidential candidates make a point to show how much they support Israel. They emphasize the strong bonds between the two countries in terms of history, bilateral trade, and strategic alliances. It's true each president has enacted pretty different policies toward Israel. George Bush Sr. had a tumultuous relationship with the Jewish state. Bill Clinton and George W. Bush struck close friendships with their prime minister counterparts. Barack Obama didn't always see eye to eye with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, while Donald Trump usually does. Yet despite these differences, every president, Democrat or Republican, has fundamentally supported Israel, in office and on the campaign trail.
This morning, the flags of India went up on the roof of the King David Hotel, and I saw it from my veranda, from my mirpesset. What is mirpesset in English? A balcony. It was an extraordinary moment. 4 beautiful flags, 3 Israeli flags. And for me, this is the accomplishment of a way that I went over, I would say, 60 years now. My interest in India started when I was a young boy.